Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome into GC Live Afternoon Drive. I am Mike Euban. The Gamecocks are getting ready for their home opener this weekend as they are set to take on FCS Furman, a team who is ranked number 6 in FCS and a team that has had a lot of success dating back to last season. Now, of course, people don't want to necessarily hear that, right? They're going to say, okay, it's an FCS team. South Carolina should win this game. And I'm not saying they're going to lose this game. But this isn't like it's SC State last year or Charlotte. This will be a good test for them. This will be a good test, but South Carolina, they have a lot of things to clean up this weekend, and we already know that. Want to get into the keys of the game, as we do every week with this new program. We did that last week, and you're going to notice kind of a deja vu with the keys this week, and rightfully so, right? Especially when we're talking about the offense. But I also want to hear from you guys, so let us know what you think about this weekend's matchup. Let us know what you thought about last week, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. There's obviously a lot of ugly and bad that we've talked about, but at the same time, too, maybe there's some things that you did like. Maybe there's some things that, if you heard from Dal Loggins yesterday, it makes you optimistic that South Carolina will find some confidence this weekend, and that's what this weekend's all about. This weekend is being able to find some confidence, being able to correct things and a lot of things on the offensive line, to be able to carry some momentum before they head into SEC play, which, as we know, they have a very tough challenge when they go to Athens the following week to take on Georgia between the hedges. So let's get into it. You can head on over to GamecockCentral.com to hear my full thoughts on all three of these keys, as we do every week. Quick slants on Gamecock Central. If you're not a subscriber right now, sign up today. Just $1 if you have not signed up for GC quite yet. A lot of great content over there. Well, it starts with keeping Rattler upright, and that goes without saying, right? What we saw last weekend, and if you have been paying attention to anything that I've been saying or writing going back to last offseason, having to replace the number of starting bodies on the offensive line, you knew was going to be a challenge for South Carolina. Now you throw in the fact that you lose your left tackle in the spring game. Your right tackle goes down a couple series into the opener last week against North Carolina. And on top of that, you have a new offensive coordinator. So it was a recipe for disaster. And, oh, by the way, one thing that Beamer has been talking about for weeks is just how thin they are when it comes to depth. That's not an excuse. That's just the reality of it. And when you have to play a Power 5 team week 1, when all those things go south quickly, as it did the other night, you're setting yourself up for just an absolute train wreck. And that's what happened. 9 sacks. 9 sacks. So as you get ready for this weekend's game, and I hinted at it on Gamecock Central earlier in the week on the Insiders Forum, there's going to be some changes on the offensive line. We heard that to an extent with Shane Beamer, with Dal Loggins, with some of the players like Nick Gargiulo and Vershawn Lee, who spoke earlier this week. But one thing that I pointed out at is that Nick Gargiulo, the transfer from Yale, he could be getting bumped out to left tackle this weekend. He could be getting bumped to left tackle position where he was an all-Ivy Leaguer last season. And I know some people roll their eyes when they hear, oh, you play in the Ivy League. Well, slow down, okay? South Carolina's had success with bringing in some FCS talent, even Division II talent, but FCS talent. All right, Juice Wells, I know he's banged up right now, 2nd in the conference last year in receiving yards, 5th in receptions in the SEC last year. He was from FCS. And, oh, by the way, the leading tackler in the NFL for the past 2 seasons, he went to Yale. So you can have talent, and I think a lot of you understand that, but there's some people that need to be reminded about that. So if Gargiulo does get bumped over to left tackle, I do feel like South Carolina will be able to find some type of continuity in their offensive line. On the right side of the ball, as I've mentioned on the Insider Forum going back to Monday, Ja'Kai Moore could be getting kicked out to right tackle. Now, these are things that South Carolina hasn't announced yet. And as I've said before, the 2 deep doesn't really mean anything. It's something that we can sit here and we can kind of talk about at the beginning of the week. It's cool. I know that a lot of people have fun talking about it on the message boards, but it really means nothing. Absolutely nothing. I mean, take Marquis Anderson for an example. He didn't even travel with the team last week because he got banged up late in the week leading up to the North Carolina game. So don't put a lot of stock into what you see on the 2 deep depth chart that gets released at the beginning of the week because it means absolutely nothing. But I do feel like, again, we don't know what this offensive line will ultimately look like. But if Gargiulo does get bumped over to left tackle, I do have confidence that South Carolina will be stronger on that side. And then Ja'Kai Moore has played both right and left tackle throughout his career. Now, there's going to be some people that are going to say, well, why weren't they in those spots to begin with? Well, Jalen Nichols goes down in the spring game before your first game of the year. And then Kason Henry is playing right tackle. He goes down a couple series in. South Carolina felt good enough to at least go with that lineup last week, but clearly it didn't work. And obviously you can't control the injuries, but the backup plan they had in place, that wasn't something that worked out very well, as we all know. So you flush it, you move on. And I think South Carolina, with the matchup they have this week, and again, it's a good FCS team in Furman, but you should be able to take care of them. And if you're able to figure out the offensive line woes based on what we saw Spencer Rattler do last week, throwing for over 350 yards, completing 30 or 39 passes, protecting the football, despite the fact that he's running around for his life back there, it should give you some hope that the Gamecocks are going to be able to figure things out from an offensive standpoint. Now, there's multiple layers when we peel this thing back to talk about, right? We can talk about the issues in the run game. I think the run game, though, also goes back to the fact that they just weren't consistent on the offensive line. There was no push. Never mind the fact that they weren't able to protect Rattler throughout the game, and clearly that showed. But if you're not able to get any type of push whatsoever, and you're also playing behind in the second half by 2 touchdowns, the run game is going to go out the window. And we saw that happen the other night. So if the pass blocking improves this weekend, not only do I expect Rattler to have success in the passing game, but I also expect to see the run game look better this weekend as well. Frederick, good afternoon. Good to see you, Frederick. Travis, one of our regulars on Tuesdays. Travis says, here's what I believe is a key for the week. The number 35, that's the minimum rushing attempts we should see this week. And Travis, look, it goes back to obviously playing with the lead, not falling behind. You know, that was one thing that I felt like it kind of got blown out of proportion a little bit because of the comments made by a defensive lineman from UNC saying that there were tendencies that South Carolina was doing that they were able to pick up on. And Loggins kind of rolled his eyes a little bit when he spoke about it yesterday. But, I mean, shoot, he brought up some good points. He's like, this is the first time that this offense has played together. So what tendencies, right? There were times, as Loggins pointed out, that North Carolina, they were pointing up before the play to say that there was going to be a pass play from South Carolina, and it was a run play. Okay? So I bring these things up because, yes, there's certain things that you can tell from a stance standpoint. I mean, even going down to the Division II level, there were things that we had guys that would watch tendencies and try to figure out stances. And, yeah, you can pick up certain things like that. But when you're down by 2 scores, you're probably going to have to be passing the football, especially in that fourth quarter. And that's what happened with South Carolina. So if they're able to have the success that they feel like they can against Furman from an offensive standpoint, then yes, they should be running the football a little bit more this weekend. No question about it. Whether it be 35, whether it be 40 times. And that brings us to my second point for my keys of the week. And this goes to the other side of the football. But talking about the run game, Furman is a team that has had a lot of success running the football. A lot of success. When you look back to not just last week's game for Furman, but you go back to last season, they've rushed for over 200 yards in each of their last 3 games. Looking off to the screen to my right here, where I have my notes. They also rushed for 150 yards, nearly 150 yards against Clemson last season. Last week, when you remove a couple of kneel downs that North Carolina took in that game, Tar Heels rushed for over 170 yards. So one of the issues that we saw last week, and I pointed this out on Tuesday, It's just being able to tackle an open space, being able to take your angles better. Because I felt like for the most part, South Carolina was in position. They were in position to be able to have a couple TFLs, and they only had one. Or they were also in position to be able to make tackles where runs would only go for 2 or 3 yards. Instead, they went for 10, 15 plus. Now, Clayton White did point out, and I went back and I've watched it a couple more times after his press conference yesterday. Yeah, there were times where South Carolina made tackles that could have been longer. They could have gone for 40, 50-yard runs. Instead, they went for 10 or 12. He gave it a C plus grade. I gave it, I think, was stopping the run. Now, again, he was talking specifically about tackling, but just me speaking about stopping the run, I think I gave it a D plus. But I think the big thing this weekend against Furman is they're going to try to run the football on you. They're going to try to run the football on you. This is a team who is not going to be afraid to come in here and do what they do. You have teams sometimes that are smaller, at least on paper, and they could physically be smaller as well when they come in here. But they're not going to act like it. They're going to come in here and they're going to try to play the type of football that they know how to play. And we haven't even talked about Furman's defense yet, which I'll get to. But this weekend, Furman's going to run the football at you. You have to do a hell of a better job of stopping the run, and that comes down to tackling. That comes down to taking better angles. I'm not trying to write off Furman, but in comparison to the athleticism that North Carolina has, this team's not as athletic as what you saw last week. And as I mentioned during the game, I thought Stone Blanton, and you could tell, we talked about it in the offseason, but Stone being down about 10, 12 pounds and being toner, he was moving around a hell of a lot quicker in that game. And at times it appeared that they had Stone playing some type of spy on Drake May. And you could just tell, and Stone played, I think he played every snap, they said, defensively, or nearly every snap, which Clayton White mentioned on Wednesday that won't be the case moving forward with their linebackers. And obviously a part of that had to do with the fact that they were just so thin at linebacker. Not just linebacker, but they were thin at a lot of positions. Defensively, Nick Eamon-Worry goes down. I think he only played 3 plays. So I bring that up because guys like Stone Blanton, guys like Debo Williams, they're going to have a monster game this weekend. Yeah, we could talk about the defensive line. There's no question about that. The Tonkas of the world, the Boogie Huntleys, the Jordan Strawns, we can go down the list with the defensive linemen. But it's that second level. It's that second level with your linebackers. Again, Stone Blanton, Debo Williams, Puff Howard plays a little bit more this weekend. That's him as well. With Mo Kaba being out of the mix, every linebacker needs to be ready to go. Don't be shocked to see guys get moved around a little bit. So I bring that up because, yes, in a perfect world, you want your defensive line to be able to dominate the opposition and be able to stop the run right there and get a bunch of TFLs. But at some point, and it's football, against a team that has had success running the football against FBS teams. Again, Clemson, they ran for nearly 150 yards on them last year. This is a team that will get to that second level. And your linebackers, they have to play sound football. They have to do their 111th. They have to be reading the right gaps. So that's why I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the linebackers this week. Because, again, Furman is going to want to come in here and run the football. And if South Carolina has the success of being able to stop them and not letting them get by that second level, they're going to be fine this weekend. They're going to be fine. And I'm looking at this game just the same way as I would look at it when the Gamecocks played Georgia next week, or just like how they played against North Carolina last week. It's a team on the schedule. That's how the team's taking it and approaching it. I'm approaching it that way when we talk about it here today, because I'm sure there's going to be some people that will say, well, they should just come out and beat the crap out of them. Look, don't take anything for granted. And that brings me to my final key this week, which is don't let special teams beat you. We know, and it goes without saying, how dominant South Carolina's special teams has been over the last 2 seasons with Pete Lembo and Shane Beamer. But having said that, it should not ever, but especially this week, ever be taken for granted. With this Furman team, as I mentioned, they are number 6 in the country in FCS. They have won 8 of their last 9 games. The only loss came in the playoffs last year against a very, very, very good team. I think it was Incarson Ward, who they lost to, and they lost by 3. But special teams, like South Carolina last year, special teams was key for them in 2022. Paladins led FCS with 10 block kicks, and they used special teams to springboard themselves to many victories. You go back and you look at a lot of the wins they had, especially in those close games. A lot of those close games, they had a block kicked. What happened to South Carolina last year? We talked about this a lot. Special teams played a big part in the Gamecocks being able to probably win at least 3 games, if not more. And we've mentioned this before. I mean, there's a couple games. You look at the Clemson game at the end of the game. The big fumble recovery by Nate Atkins to force the fumble. You think of the big return against Texas A&M to start the game off at home with Xavier Luedecke. Georgia State week 1, 2 block kicks, returns for touchdowns. South Carolina, like FCS Furman last year, special teams played a big role in them winning. Big role. And when you're going up against a team, as Pete Lembo pointed out, I don't care if they're a Division III team, for crying out loud, coming in here. They're a veteran group. They take special teams seriously. That's why the Gamecocks have been able to have success. You have to have guys that understand what you're doing and want to be out there on the field. And I'll talk a little about that with Mo Kaba later, because I know there's been some people saying, well, why was Mo out there on kickoff? You know that he's got a leg that's kind of been banged up going back to last year at the AC. We'll talk about that. But those are my initial keys this week. Keep Rattler upright, protect him. Same as it was last week. This week, stop the run, as I mentioned last week, but more so just finishing your tackles, better angles, not letting this Furman team get past that second level, because they're going to get to the second level. And that's where Stone Blandon, Debo Williams, Pup Howard, the linebackers out there, they're going to have to step up. They're going to have to step up, especially without Mo Kaba now for the rest of the year. Devastating injury. And you can't really say enough good things about Mo, because you go back to the spring when Mo wasn't out there and he was on the sidelines. And you had guys like Stone, like Pup, who would share how, despite the fact that Mo wasn't out there practicing, he was a tremendous leader in coaching them up. And when they would come off the field, he would say, why did you do this? They would just have dialogue back and forth, kind of like an extra coach out there. So to lose Mo Kaba, it's brutal. But because of how selfless Mo was this past spring, and I'm sure it was the same way during the preseason camp, he's been able to help develop some of these younger players. And I know it's a small sample size, it's just one game, but based on what we saw from Stone Blanton the other night, my goodness, between trimming down and then getting coached up and by Mo and having the ability, the advantage of working with the first teams during the spring, it truly paid dividends the other night. And he'll have to continue that. With his workload certainly going to be more as they move forward. So again, keep Rattler upright, finish those tackles, making sure you stop the run. And number 3, don't let special teams beat you. You've been so dominant. Don't let a team who also has had success in special teams over the last couple of years come in here and they're able to steal that momentum from you because they come in and they dominate a phase of the game where you've been very, very sound at over the last 2 seasons. Travis says, whoever is the starting offensive lineman needs to play the entire game. They need reps together to get on the same page. Look, this week, we already know guys like Marquis Anderson are banged up, and there's a long injury report list, and Shane Beamer will speak tonight at Carolina Calls. That will start at 6 new time. I think that changed last year, but for some people, because they continued to ask last week, yes, there is a new time. It used to be 7 back in the day. That changed about a year ago. It's moved up to 6 now. 107.5 The Game if you want to tune in, but Gamecock Central will have live updates for you as well. But the injury report, at least on Tuesday, I don't have it in front of me, but I think I pretty much remember every injury. Casey Henry, he's out. Marquis Anderson, Nick Eamon-Worry, they are both doubtful for this week. David Spalding, also doubtful this week. And again, this is from Tuesday from Shane Beamer. And then, of course, Mo Kaba, he is out for the remainder of the season. Juice Wells practiced on Tuesday. Juice Wells practiced again on Wednesday. Don't have an update on today's practice, but I would assume that Juice was out there again. Juice said last week to ESPN's Molly McGrath that he's 80% or was 80% going into that game. And certainly, as we saw in that game, with him not being able to play nearly as much as what we all would have loved to have seen him play, that number was probably generous, right? So if Juice is saying 80%, I don't want to play this popsicle headache game of saying, 80%, 60, 70. But if Juice is probably saying 80%, he's probably closer to 60%. He's probably close to 60%. The challenging part is, again, you can't sleep on Furman, because if this team comes out, if South Carolina comes out this weekend and they sleepwalk, Furman's going to punch them in the face. And if you thought things were bad this past week with the doom and gloom, just wait. Just wait. Now, I don't expect that to happen, but the point being is, if USC is able to have some success this weekend, and you're able to rest up Juice a little bit more, get ready for that Georgia game, you're hoping that that toe injury is going to be better. I don't know if they've actually disclosed that was the injury, but it's a foot injury, it's a toe injury, and you're hoping that Juice is going to be as close to 100% as possible sooner rather than later, because certainly he's still not right now. He's not. Moving along. Hunter, did he change the offensive line from last game? Yeah, I mean, look, we haven't seen it yet, Hunter, but as I mentioned before, and I hinted at it at the beginning of the week on the Insiders Forum on Gamecock Central. If you're not a subscriber, sign up today for just $1. But the left tackle position, based on everything that I've been told going back to Sunday night, Nick Gargiulo could be the left tackle this week. He could be getting bumped out there. And then Ja'Kai Moore could be getting bumped to right tackle. So your two guards going from guard positions, left guard, right guard, to left tackle, right tackle. And both guys have experience of playing those tackle positions. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I know there's going to be some people that will naturally say, well, why wasn't that the case the other night? You couldn't have foreseen Casey Henry going down early in that game. And at that point, too, you have a little bit of confidence, at least, that the guys that you've been working with at those positions, whether it be left tackle, right tackle, first team, second team, that you have some confidence that even if an injury happens, that they're going to be able to do their job. Well, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And it's not just individual performances. It's how do those individuals come together and build a rapport when all 5 of them are out there together and they're working as a unit on the offensive line. And clearly it didn't work out that well, as we all saw the other night. So what does that mean, though, for the guard positions? I mean, we know, again, Marquis Anderson, he's a little banged up, but I wouldn't be shocked to see at some point this season to see some of those younger guys in the offensive line getting some reps. But, I mean, shoot, we have a long, long season to go. We're only at week 2. We're week 2. Pope Kyle, TCG says, the Freddie Kitchen interview about those tendencies was a bit odd and seems like he provided insight to UNC. There could have been, I didn't see the Freddie Kitchens interview, Kyle, but there's certainly things where, because you've been on staff and you've worked with players, whether it be for a year, 2, 3, right? I mean, Muschamp being at Georgia, certainly we noticed it in the first year when they played South Carolina. And granted, I mean, Georgia has a lot of talent. That's why they've won the national championship the last 2 years. But there's certainly things as a coach that you know about your players when you're around them more, right? Just like anything in life. Could be a girlfriend, could be a friend. Like, you know, certain tendencies from being around them. So you go to another place. I mean, yeah, if you know something, you're going to kind of tip people off about it. So it's probably more than anything when we're talking about those tendencies, it's probably more so the alignment of the offensive linemen with their feet, right? Kind of tipping off certain things with how they were going to block, whether it be a pass, whether it be a run, the angle that they were going to be taking. But again, as Dal Loggins pointed out to the other day, when you're down by 2 scores in the fourth quarter, everyone and their freaking mother knows that it's going to likely be a pass play. But South Carolina, just like any team in FBS, and even down to the FCS level, and we even had it in Division II, you have people that are watching that. You have people that are watching and trying to pick up those tendencies so that you can correct that. So if there were anything that North Carolina was picking up on, hopefully that's cleaned up this week. Travis says, again, Mike, I believe running the ball is all about the mindset of the team. After the first drive, I knew we would struggle to run. We need to set the tone and be stubborn. Well, and I know it all depends who you listen to, right? There were some people that weren't too happy with the offense the other night, just from a schematic standpoint. And obviously we didn't get to really see that much just because of the constant pressure that Spencer Rattler was under throughout the night. But then there was also some people that realized, and this is where I fall, the camp that I fall into, is because of the issues on the offensive line and because of the injuries that took place as the game went on as well, because how thin they were too, that's why South Carolina was going with more of a quick game. That's why you noticed more screens, bubbles, short passes. I know there were people that were upset, and rightfully so. I totally get it. I think it was the fourth quarter. Fourth quarter was 4th and 19. It was right after the intentional grounding from Rattler. And the reason why it was intentional grounding in the red zone is because Rattler had no blocking up front on that right side. And that's why he tried to throw the football away, but unfortunately he wasn't out of the pocket, and it was intentional grounding. But what does South Carolina do? Well, they come back out there. They need to be able to score a touchdown at that point. Field goal is not going to do anything for you. It's just not. And they, 4th and 19, they threw it to the original line of scrimmage. I think it was like, the 9-yard pass, 10-yard pass. Didn't get them anything. Didn't get them anywhere close to where they needed to go. So I bring that up because I think it's just a microcosm of what the issue was the other night, which is they didn't have any confidence. And as we saw as the game played out, do you blame them? They didn't have any confidence in their offensive line as a unit to be able to keep Rattler up, to give him time. And that's why there was a lot of short passes and, again, screens, bubbles, all those things that you're trying to do to be able to get the offense moving quickly and get the ball out quick, knowing that if you give Rattler a chance to drop back in that pocket, there's a chance that he might lose his head just because that's how the game went the other night. Billy says the running back from Newberry, you're talking about Mario Anderson. Running back from Newberry, is he going to play? He should have running back moves. He should know better. He should know better than DJ. Well, I always say this. Again, it's just one game, okay? It's just one game. It's one game. You're playing against a Power 5 team. If South Carolina is playing against TikTok Tech week 1, regardless of the injuries that took place, but you're going to probably see some of those younger guys or some of those players who might not be 100% caught up to speed on everything. But because you're going into a Power 5 matchup week 1, you're trying to find guys that not only understand what you're doing, but that you can trust to be ready in that moment. And that's not a shot against Mario Anderson or any of the other players on the team, but that's just the reality of it. In the process, when you have to play a tougher opponent week 1, there's more information that is being spewed. Now, yes, Mario and a lot of these other players that you'll probably mention outside of DJ Braswell, they were all here in the spring. So they've had kind of a grace period to get acclimated, but it's not the same in comparison to when you're getting ready for a in-season opponent. So I bring all that up because, and Dal Loggins brought this up with Nicholas Harbor, and I know this isn't your direct question about running backs, but this is just looking at it as a whole. He shared that with Nicholas Harbor missing some time practice because he got banged up a little bit, especially with some of those younger players. How can you feel confident about where they're at when you put them in a game? So that's why Harbor didn't play as much the other night. And the other thing, too, is he's a true freshman. Shane Beamer talked about it 2 weeks ago. We shared a freaking story about it. And Beamer, and I'm paraphrasing, but what he said was, you got to kind of just, temper the expectations, bring them down a little bit when it comes to freshmen. And he went down the list. He was naming a bunch of players who are starting this week, starting week 1, that is. Spencer Rattler, Vershawn Lee. You keep going down the list, there's a bunch of players who redshirted their freshman year. And that's not to say Nicholas Harbor will redshirt. That's not what I'm saying. But the whole point being is it's one game. These guys are freshmen, okay? On top of that, you have a Mario Anderson in this situation. He's getting ready for his first SEC game. Some of these guys may have not been ready for the moment. Now, having said that, does that mean it is a direct reflection on those players? No. But it's real easy to be like, well, that's the coach's responsibility. Coaches can only get you prepared for as much as you can, as quickly as you can. When you have a Power 5 matchup week 1, it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. It's not. That's why you pay attention to what LSU does this year. I'm telling you. Florida State, they were extremely prepared the other night. Extremely prepared. But pay attention to what LSU does this season. Because if they're able to bounce back and have the type of success that a lot of people expect them to have this year in the SEC, but as a whole, I think a lot of people will say, well, what happened week 1? Well, some people just weren't prepared. People weren't ready for that week 1 matchup. And then their situation's a little bit different, of course, than what South Carolina has. Travis says, you can't call yourself a physical team, and the first play of the season is a trick play. The more you say that, Travis, and I'll see if I can get some type of clarification, because I don't think anyone has really said anything from South Carolina's camp about it. But the way that play was developing, it looked like there was some type of double pass, and it kind of got botched there. I don't know if that was the case or just looked that way from up top in the press box, but you're not the only person that has mentioned that. And that goes back to after the game as well. Many people were saying that. Travis Hill, Mike, as bad as the O-line looked, when do we say, let's see what these young men I'm just trying to go back and read this. Mike, as bad as the O-line look, when do we say, let's see these young guys can do? I think what you're trying to say, Travis, and I'm trying to read it the way that you wrote it out. Basically, what Travis is trying to say is, when do we say, hey, let's just see what these guys can do, okay? I think that's what you have to do this weekend. I think you can't just look at last week and be like, oh, man, South Carolina is screwed this year. Now, if they were playing a Furman, if they were playing a Georgia State, let's go back to last year. South Carolina's offense, never mind their offensive line. The offensive line took a lot of heat. Think about what happened last year, okay? South Carolina's offense was not very good. And the reason why they won that game is because they blocked 2 kicks and they returned for touchdowns. What happened after that game? A lot of people were calling for the heads of different offensive linemen, okay? Not specifically like saying, Johnny needs to be out, but they were calling for the O-line's head, okay? The O-line coach, too. God bless Greg Atkins and everything that he had to deal with last season. That was another thing he had to deal with. It comes with the territory. But point being is this. What happened? Got Arkansas the next week. They made improvements. They were in that game. They struggled to be able to finish. Defensively, they had some issues. Doesn't help when Jordan Strong goes down with a knee injury and he's done for the year. Mo Kaba went down with an injury that game. He was done for the year. But the Gamecocks had a chance to be able to win in that Arkansas game. And then, of course, they lost to Georgia the week after. and all hell broke loose on the message boards and on social media before South Carolina turned things around. I'm not saying that is what the Gamecocks need in order to turn this season around, but the point being is, in a sense, it's not true apples to apples. We've seen this song and dance before from this team from last year. And I do feel like this team will get better as the season goes on. The reason why I believe that is because with what Rattler did the other night, it's hard not to look at it and be like, man, he did that against a Power 5 team with no blocking up front and without his best receiver, arguably one of the best receivers in the country at that, in Juice Wells. And as I've been saying on social media, on the message boards this week, and it's a big if, but if South Carolina can clean up the O-line with what we saw from Rattler the other night, going back to what Travis was asking, it should excite you. It should excite you. Now, if you have your doubts, if you're skeptical because of the blocking the other night, I don't blame you. I'm not telling you, I'm not looking at the glass and just saying, okay, it's half full because it's half full. No, I'm giving you reasons why I believe that's the case. And at the end of the day, yes, talk is cheap. They have to go out there and they have to execute it. And the unfortunate reality is for South Carolina this weekend is if they go out there and they have the success against Furman, which again, I know people are tired of hearing it, but Furman's a good team. They're a good team. They're not an SEC team. They're an FCS team. And you should be able to take care of them. But they're a good team. They're a good team. They outgamed Clemson in yardage a year ago. You have to be ready to gain confidence this weekend. Because if you go out there and you've beat Furman by, 20 plus, 30 plus points, whatever the hell it is, you're able to dominate the line. Let's say Takarian Joyner rushes for over 100, 150, 200, whatever the case may be as a unit, 200 yards. Rattler is spotless. They don't allow many sacks, if any sacks at all. The narrative's going to be, well, can they do it again next week against Georgia? That was an FCS team. So, again, this week is more about just cleaning things up and gaining that confidence internally. Because regardless of what South Carolina does this week, from the outside perspective, and I don't want to speak for every Gamecock fan because I'm sure some of them understand it, but naturally the reality is going to be people aren't going to look at it and say, wow, South Carolina has all their problems solved. They're not. So, again, worry about what you got to do this week, clean things up, gain that confidence. Barrick says FCS talent doesn't work at O-line. I don't entirely agree with you, Barrick. And the reason I say that is, and he mentioned the skill positions sometimes. The reason I say that is it's one game, and it's tough to look at the offensive line and say anything good about it. But Nick Gargiulo had a friggin' pretty decent game. He had a pretty good game the other night, all things considered. And again, that's not Mike saying, wow, Mike's saying the offensive line did good things. No. When you go back, and I believe we actually heard it from Dow Loggins and on Wednesday, where he gave credit, and I'm paraphrasing, but one of the words I remember, the saying that he said was they stayed in the fight. He mentioned Gargiulo and Vershawn Lee. Gargiulo did some good things. He did some good things. And for a guy that is making the jump up from the Ivy League to the SEC, and, obviously they're going against ACC talent, but going up to Power 5 level, he didn't seem like the spotlight was too big for him. Now, unfortunately, when you're playing on the offensive line, you give up 9 sacks, it's tough to look at anyone on the O-line and be like, hey, wow, he did a good job. But again, as I mentioned before, based on some of the things I've been told going back to Sunday, and even though this has not been confirmed yet by South Carolina, Gargiulo could be getting bumped out to left tackle this week. And if he plays left tackle, I have more confidence in that in comparison to what we saw last weekend. And the reason why I say that is Gargiulo was an absolute monster at Yale at left tackle. And he's a guy that has been getting looked at by NFL scouts, even going back to last year. And I think he could be one of those guys that when we look back at this season, that he is one of those guys that will certainly be in the mix to be able to play at the next level. But one step at a time. Frederick Cooper says pass rush must be better. They have to put pressure on Furman. No question about it. Now, the challenging part this weekend is, as I mentioned before, Furman's a team that likes to run the football. So even though you can't fall asleep as a defensive back, or in this case, talking about more so the edges and the defensive tackles, you can't fall asleep on the fact that there could be some play action thrown in there. I mean, that's what a team like Furman will fall back on. They want to run the football, but they're also hoping that they can get you sleeping a little bit, throw in a little play action and be able to beat you down the field. So it presents a challenge, but if you're able to, and it's complementary football here, South Carolina is able to have success in the other phases of the game, special teams, but specifically offense doing well, and they're able to put some points up. Furman's going to have to be a team that throws the ball more and becomes more one-dimensional, kind of like what happened to South Carolina last week against North Carolina, especially late in that game once they fell behind 2 touchdowns. So I think with this weekend, the opportunities to rush the passer, there might not be as many because, again, that's not to say Furman doesn't throw the football. They do, but because they are a team that wants to rely on the run game, you're going to have to be ready for that. However, if you do have an opportunity to get a sack, TFLs, whatever the case may be, doesn't even have to be the pass rush. You have to finish those tackles. Steel curtain. Defense got to be disciplined with their keys, pass rush and coverage, especially in the nickel. Has to be better. Happy. Good to see you. So no disrespect to Furman. They play his ball, but when South Carolina needs to seriously be concerned about losing to Furman, we got a problem, which it's very obvious we do. Serious ones on both sides of the ball. Again, I don't think it's about South Carolina losing to Furman. I mean, there's probably going to be some people out there that feel that way. I'm not worried about that. And some of the comments that coaches have made this week, whether it be Shane Beamer, whether it be Dal Loggins, while I don't think it's just coach talk, I think more than anything, especially with it being an in-state team, they just respect the team that they're playing. That's been going on for years, man. I mean, that's football for you, especially when it comes to media, knowing that whatever you say, they probably have a grad assistant that's going through everything, and they're relaying that back to the head coach for that week. In this case, it's Furman. So I think the Gamecocks respect them, and they realize, too, that if they play as poorly as they did the other night in some of the phases of the game, especially from an offensive standpoint, but as well as not being able to make some tackles, right, and finish some of those plays off as well and defensively, that you could give Furman a chance. Never mind the fact of the situation that could happen on special teams if you're not sound. WJM41 says, feels like Juice injury is going to be like the Corey Rucker situation last year. I wouldn't compare it to that. I'll say with Corey, first off, the injuries were totally different. With Juice, I think he wants to get out there because not saying that Corey didn't, but Juice wants to get out there and help the team. But I just don't know how close he is to being the Juice that we all know him to be. And this is not Mike saying, oh, Juice is 50%. Oh, Juice isn't, himself right now. He's off. But again, each week that goes by, as long as he's doing the proper rehabbing that takes place throughout the week, he'll be getting closer and closer to being the Juice that we all know him to be. So, again, as I mentioned, going back to last week, Juice Wells told ESPN's Molly McGrath going into that game against North Carolina that he was feeling, quote, 80%. Just as an outsider looking in, and you guys can weigh in on your numbers, from a percentage standpoint, I'd probably put it at like maybe a 60. maybe 60, 50, 60% of what Juice really was the other night, probably from a health standpoint. And that's just more of an educated guess than anything else. But I think with Juice, it's, again, trying to get him to be in that right mindset so that when he does get back on the field, more so for SEC play, that he'll be ready to go. Now, Corey's situation was a little different. And I hated the fact that Corey went through that injury because it took a toll on him from a mental standpoint. It took an absolute toll. And this is someone that grew up in Mississippi. I don't want to go too deep on this, but I've been able to learn a lot about Corey and his situation and just knowing him as a person over the last year plus. But being close to home, and, you're the guy at Arkansas State. Then you come here to South Carolina and you go through an injury really for the first time in your life, and you feel like you're letting a lot of people down. And it just takes an absolute toll on you as a young person, especially when you're not used to the spotlight being that big on you, right? Again, he was the man at Arkansas State. Comes on over here because he wants to play in a bigger spotlight. And you talk to anybody, and it's just ironic that we're talking about Juice and Corey. Those are two guys that roomed with each other last year. You talk to anybody, everyone loved Corey Rucker. Just an awesome individual, worked his tail off. The injury, though, it really killed him. It really hurt him from a mental standpoint. And being able to get closer to home and go back to Arkansas State, it was something that he needed. And as much as I would have loved to have seen him stay at South Carolina, because I think that, he could have done a lot of good things. And I hate that he had to go through that injury last year. I don't think it's anything close to compare to when it comes to Juice and Corey. And that's why I say it that way. Fulbright Jason says, the chain crew is eating hot dogs. They were. I got my, where is it? You can't see it back there. I got my Joey Chestnut picture with him. We had a couple of dogs out in San Jose at a college football playoff game at a media day. Somehow convinced them to eat hot dogs that I bought. I walked down the street. Someone told me in the hospitality suite for the media, they said, you got to have a hot dog with Joey Chestnut. I said, that'd be a dream. I said, we're going to see him tomorrow at media day. And I said, where can I get a hot dog? It's friggin' like 4 a.m. Well, he told me to go down this street, take a block here, do this. So I'm walking the streets around 4 a.m., 3:30, whatever the case may be in San Jose. I don't know where the hell I am. And I'm looking for a little vendor. And I guess they're called San Jose street dogs. Basically just a hot dog with bacon wrapped around it. And I found the guy, and I asked for extra tinfoil. The guy, I thought I was disrespecting his mother, pulled a gun on me. Fortunately, someone spoke English and came over and de-escalated the situation. But we ended up having a couple dogs, bringing them to Joey Chestnut the next day and convincing him to have a hot dog with us. But yeah, could have used Joey Chestnut, at least the skills for some of those chain crew guys the other night. I will say this, though, in terms of eating those hot dogs quicker. Hot dogs at Bank of America Stadium are pretty freaking good. They have a bunch of them for the media up in the press box at halftime. Those things are pretty good. But fortunately for South Carolina, and I know the outcome of the game as a whole, but the outcome after that onside kick, it didn't flourish into any points or momentum. But give a lot of credit to Mitch Jeter. Mitch Jeter did a phenomenal job executing the onside kick. And I pointed this out, too. If you haven't seen it yet, go back. Gamecock Plus did an interview, a little sit-down film sesh with Pete Lembo. And Lembo is talking about the play itself and what they were looking at, all that kind of stuff. But one thing that I noticed is that to the left of Mitch Jeter, you have Jalen Kilgore. And Kilgore had a phenomenal game, did a phenomenal job of stepping in once Nick Eamon went down, the true freshman. Comes in and does an unbelievable job. Double digits in tackles. He had 10. But he also, in a short period of time, has, one, figured out the importance of special teams at South Carolina. But number two, he's also earned the trust and the confidence from someone like Lembo to be put in a situation where they put him next to Jeter on a play like that. You don't put someone there, especially a freshman, if you don't trust them. So I think it just speaks volumes of not only what Jalen Kilgore is doing from a defensive standpoint, and again, it's just one game, but it's a pretty good start for a true freshman. But on top of that, the fact that he's been able to earn the trust of Lembo as well. And Lembo gave him credit in that video because his job, as well as the individual to the right of Mitch Jeter, they're coming down and their job is to clean things up. Mitch did a great job to the point where he really didn't need that as much help on both sides, but they come down, they kind of clean up house to be able to allow Mitch to recover that onside kick, and it worked to perfection. It worked to perfection. Who do I got this weekend? A little off-topic subject, Pats Eagles. Brady's back in the house, but I think it's going to be tough to bet against the Eagles. I think you got to go with the Eagles week 1. Fulbright, Jason says, from what Beamer took over, it's going to take more than 3 years to fix. After 5 years, if we look bad, then there's some serious concern. I think the problem is, and I appreciate the comment there, Fulbright Jason, with the transfer portal and just everything that is become what college football has ultimately become. And I know it's not just limited to college football, it's college sports as a whole, but specifically speaking about college football, it has sped the process up of wanting success and needing it. And that's not to say, okay, fans should always be patient. But year 3s are always tricky. They're always tricky. I think the big thing is, and I said it going into this season, and there was a lot of people that had high expectations, whether it be 9 wins, 10 wins. I mean, for me, I've been going back and forth. I was going back and forth all offseason. I said, this is a team that could get 7 to 8 wins. They're going to have to make up for one of those games later on in the year because I had them beating North Carolina. I picked them to beat North Carolina. But it was a toss-up game. I didn't think it was going to go the way it did the other night. But you need to just show some type of consistency this season. If you can get to 7 wins, and again, to some people, that's not going to be enough for them. You're not going to please everybody. The reality is you have to be able to build some type of consistency moving forward so you can show that you are making progress. Progress isn't necessarily always going to be, okay, we're going to go from 7 wins to 8 wins to 9 wins. 10. It's the SEC. It's the SEC, and you have a very young team right now. That's why I keep saying, and I said it a couple months ago, and I'll keep saying it, this team is really, especially if they have the retention, if they're able to retain the players that they have here, I really think they're 2 years away from doing something special. But not a lot of people want to hear that right now, and I totally understand that. But the Gamecocks are going to have to continue to develop some of the younger guys they have, and they will at some point this season. They will. But at the same time, too, in a lot of those positions, it's not just going to be as easy as, okay, plug this 4-star or plug this 5-star in, and he's ready to go. It doesn't work that way. This isn't a video game. This isn't a video game. These are 17, 18-year-old young men that are coming in here, not just only learning what college football is all about, but they're learning what college is all about. Some of them, it just takes them a little bit longer. And again, it's just one game. One game. They didn't have the luxury of playing TikTok Tech, or some cupcake week 1. They had to play a Power 5 team and a team who is ranked, but on top of that, potentially could be making a run for an ACC title. We don't know. We look back at the end of this season, we could be talking about, man, North Carolina was one of the better teams in the country this year. Or, man, you know what? That North Carolina team, wow, they really gave the ACC a run for their money this year. It's one game. There's a lot of issues. And I'm not trying to say it excuses the puke fest, which was with what we saw from the blocking up front last weekend. That does not excuse that. But I do think that some people need to pump the brakes a little bit because it's just one game. Happy. Straight up, what I saw was a weak football team. Weak on O, weak on D. Field trick play. Bruce says, what's the word on wide receiver Landon Sampson? I've hit on this a couple times, and I'll sound like a broken record, so I apologize for anyone that has heard me say this already. I don't want to get too deep on this because when it comes to a personal family matter, I try to respect the privacy the best I can. But at the same time, too, just to give people an update on Landon. So Landon and the Sampson family, unfortunately, they've been dealing with a family issue the last couple weeks. So when you're trying to stack good days on top of good days as a young wide receiver, and then something like that happens in your personal life, it's going to throw a wrench into things. So that's kind of where things are right now with Landon Sampson. So just continue to keep the Sampson family in your prayers. Again, I don't want to get too deep into a personal matter when it involves a family, but the good news is, from everything that I've been told, based on the situation, is that things are heading in the right direction. It doesn't involve Landon, but it's a family situation that I want to just, out of respect to the Sampson family, I don't want to shed too much light more on that. But the Sampson family, Landon, they've been dealing with some things over the last couple of weeks. Craig Adams says, got to play the freshman. I don't entirely disagree with you, Craig, but it goes back to what Dal Loggins mentioned on Wednesday during his press conference, which is, it's real easy to say, and I'm not picking on you, Craig, but just in general, it's real easy to say, okay, this freshman should have played more. This person should have played more. This person should have more snaps. Well, what are they doing in practice? Again, you're playing a Power 5 team week one, so you don't have the luxury of really having that, you have a small window for that margin of error of knowing what you're going to get out of an individual, because you have to speed things up a little bit more. They probably threw, not probably, they definitely threw more coverages in there. They definitely were doing more offensively than they would in comparison if they were playing Georgia State like they did last year, or Eastern Illinois, playing one of those schools. So I say that because Nicholas Harbor played a handful of plays. Just because he did that in game one doesn't mean that will be the case for him for the rest of the year. But at the same time, too, going back to what we mentioned before from Shane Beamish press conference 2 years ago, the expectations for some of these freshmen, they need to be brought down a little bit. Some freshmen come in and they were able to make an impact right away. Okay, we've seen that a lot on the defensive side over the last couple of years, right? It's just one game, but Jalen Kilgore, what he was able to do the other night. You go back to last season, DQ Smith, Nick Eamon-Worry, and what they were able to do and having the phenomenal seasons that they put together. That doesn't mean that the offensive side, which again has a new offensive coordinator, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a freshman have success in their first year. But the reality is, it's just like, let's take things a little bit, calm down a little bit, slow down a little bit with some of these guys. Everything's going to work out. As Beamer mentioned, Spencer Rattler and some of the offensive linemen that started in the game the other night, they redshirted their first year. Okay. And I'm not saying that will be the case for every freshman or Nicholas Harbor specifically, but it just also brings up the reality that some of these guys aren't going to play the 30, 40, 50 snaps a game. Kevin Cox goes, let's start fresh. Call the O-line Carolina All-Stars. I'm looking forward to seeing what this offensive line looks like this weekend. And again, as I mentioned, you could see Nick Gargiulo out at left tackle and Ja'Kai Moore at right tackle this weekend. Depending on the success that the offensive line has, and even if they do have success, so they don't allow any sacks with that, how confident are you going to feel about the offensive line? I know we're talking in hypotheticals. I hate doing that. But what I'm trying to get at is, even if USC's offensive line improves this weekend, there's going to be a large portion, I'm sure, of this fan base that is still going to be very skeptical. And rightfully so. I totally get that. And then they play Georgia the following week because you're playing an FCS team this week. The good thing is, after the game on Saturday, we heard from a lot of you following the Mix in a Water segment on Monday with former Gamecock offensive lineman Garrett Anderson. Garrett will be one of the rotating guests now on the GC Live postgame show. So we had Michael Scarnecchia last week. Scar has done an incredible job for us in these last 2 seasons since we launched this at Gamecock Central. But Garrett Anderson will be joining us this weekend, and Garrett's going to be awesome to have on, not just throughout the course of the season, but specifically this weekend, because we'll be able to talk about what he saw from the offensive line and some of the things that hopefully we're sitting here on Saturday night talking about. Hopefully we're able to talk about some of the things that they were able to clean up and some of the things that he noticed. And we're hopefully able to say, wow, Nick Gargiulo, wow, he looks really good at left tackle. Or, oh, Ja'Kai Moore, man, he did a great job at right tackle. Or whoever the guys are at guard. Or Vershawn Lee, man, he looked like he took more of control in a leadership role at center, having played in his second game at center now in comparison to his first last week. Hopefully those are the things that we're talking about. But Garrett Anderson, he'll be joining us this fall as a rotating guest. He'll be joining us starting this weekend after the Furman game. David Williams says, if they don't improve, Furman wins. Thomas Cox goes, I sat in Williams-Brice in 1982 and watched the Furman team push our All-American defensive line with James Seawright up and down the field. Granny Reese, appreciate it. Hi, Granny. Going back to my Watch Fox days, Granny Reese always tuned in. God loves comics. Good to have you back on. Says on the Paul Feinbaum show, Steve Spurrier wanted to talk more about Deion in Colorado than Florida and Carolina. He said South Carolina had a lot of hype around it and didn't look good. That's it. Well, one thing we can always agree on is that Spurrier won't bite his tongue. You know that. Brandon goes, why is South Carolina's running back room so low on quality depth? I brought this up, and it seems like some of the questions that I'm going to be answering, and Brandon, I'm not picking on you. I appreciate you asking. But it seems like it's the same questions every week. It's the same thing. And I know not everyone's watching every show, but I've mentioned this before. As much as I want to look ahead at what could be South Carolina's running back room starting next season with 4-star Matthew Fuller, a guy who started off as a 3-star, plays for Connor Shaw's brother in Georgia, got bumped up to a 4-star on 3. Daniel Hill's also in the running to potentially be a Gamecock. We'll have to see how that pans out. But, and never mind the fact that you also have DJ Braswell, 4-star running back here as a freshman. He'll have Juju back next year as well. But one thing that I think really hurt this team is obviously they struggled to focus on bringing in running backs out of high school when they first got here. I don't know if struggle is the right word. They probably just didn't prioritize it the same way. And granted, at the time, you had Kevin Harris here, you had Juju, you had some, and then they were able to bring in some players from the portal at the running back position. So they were able to fix it in a sense, kind of like, I don't know, what's that commercial with the guy? Flex Seal, he gets this up and just puts the rubber stuff on the tank where the water's leaking out. That's kind of what they did. They kind of just Band-Aid things up a little bit, and they were able to fix the problem for a short period of time. Unfortunately, and I'm not saying they put all their eggs in one basket with this, because certainly it doesn't appear like that was the case, but Lavassier Carroll coming in, Lavassier would have been one of your key running backs this season. Potentially could have been one of your starters heading into the season. Now, I do still feel that DeCarrion Joyner would have moved over to running back regardless, even if Lavassier didn't have to give up football because of a career-ending injury or medical condition. We weren't really told the specifics about that, but he had to give up football this past spring. So I bring that up because Lavassier not being in the room, that's something that South Carolina couldn't control. They couldn't control. And if Lavassier was able to be in that room, he would have been able to play running back for 3 years? Red shirts the first year, or at least 3 years, 2 years, whatever the case may have been. So I bring that up just because it was an unfortunate situation, but I also think it's one that people don't talk about really at all. They just want to, and Brandon, again, this isn't directed at you, but I think a lot of people want to complain about the fact that South Carolina's running back room is so thin and that they didn't try and this and that. No, they did. They had some unfortunate luck, and one of those things being is what happened with Luedecke Carroll, but they're addressing it. That's why they were able to go out there and bring in a guy like DJ Braswell. That's why they've been out there and they've been able to land a guy like Matthew Fuller, and they're also trying to bring in a guy like Daniel Hill. We'll have to wait and see if that part happens, but the running back room could certainly be flipped around after this season if they are able to have that success with Hill. Gregory says, I sure hope they want to let the quarterback get sacked. Don't let the quarterback get sacked, I think is what you meant, Granny Reese. I hope so too, Granny. I hope so too. Richard Morris says, fullback or big tight end to help out with the blocking for a running attack, kind of like Nate Atkins last year. I was a little surprised that we didn't see as many, two tight end sets. I was surprised by that. Or at least being able to not just two tight end set, but putting a tight end or a fullback, as you mentioned, Richard, in the backfield to kind of help alleviate some of that pass rush. I'm not going to be shocked if we see more of it this weekend. You hope in a perfect world that the offensive line is able to do their job, and they're not going to have to worry about bringing in an extra body to keep Spencer upright. But that was the case last year. And while it was not consistent at all from an offensive standpoint, but when South Carolina did do some of those things and they did play free, we saw the success that they can have. Dal's only been here for one game. I expect him to continue to get better with understanding what he has to work with. But it's so hard to just look at the first game and be like, man, like that. I felt like from a schematic standpoint, what Dal did, I thought it was pretty good. But it's just tough to fully look at what that pitcher is going to ultimately be when you have as much of a mess as what you had with the offensive line the other night. Brandon says, why is South Carolina's running back room so low quality depth? Yeah, so same question from Brandon. Again, I think you were just retyping that out. But yeah, I mean, like I said, they have addressed it from a recruiting standpoint for next year for 2024. They brought DJ Braswell in, but the unfortunate reality is they caught some bad luck. They caught some bad luck with Luedecke Carroll not being able to play football, not just this year, but anymore. Happy says Furman plays good ball. They do play good ball. God Loves Comics says Tommy Cox saw them barely squeak out a win against Stump Mitchell in the Citadel. Oh, man. I don't want to bring back some of these bad memories, guys, as I go through this list of comments. Kevin Cox, when we beat the good guys, we look great. When we lose, some bad to small schools. Don't know exactly what the phrase you were trying to say there, Kevin. I'm reading it just the way they're coming in, guys. If you're listening to the podcast, I know you can't see the comments that pop up. Happy says, what's Juice's injury? Turf toe? If so, it's a very difficult injury to overcome, believe it or not. I don't know the specifics. All I was told is that it is a toe injury. So I don't know the exact specifics about it. Daniel Johnson goes, what's your opinion on running more two tight ends to help out? Yes, we just talked about that, Daniel. And again, some of these messages are from 20 minutes ago, trying to catch up on them. So we appreciate you guys who are have been sticking around. If you asked your question about 20 minutes, 30 minutes ago, and I'm finally answering it as I go down through all the messages, we appreciate everyone that is watching and sending questions in and comments. But like I mentioned, you're hoping in a perfect world that you don't have to do that because it frees things up. We were able to put an extra wide receiver out there, or you use that extra tight end to go out and run a pass route, right? Like all those little things. But I'm not going to be shocked to see more two tight end sets, and not just two tight end sets, as I mentioned, but a tight end or a fullback in the backfield to help alleviate some of that pass rush. Kevin Cox, good idea. Whatever it takes, give the quarterback more time. Going through, everyone's talking about the injury. with Juice. Brandon says, really excited to see Pup play this weekend. Hopefully it doesn't rain. Hopefully it doesn't rain. Let's see what the latest update is. I've been paying attention. I'm sure, like a lot of you guys have as well. Probably already have an idea of what that weather is going to be like. But the latest I've seen, I'm just looking at my Weather Channel app because there's like 80 million apps these days and where you can get your weather. So the Weather Channel app says for Saturday, 70% chance. 70% chance of rain. Fingers crossed. Or 60% chance now. Okay, you click on it, it says 70. It says 60 when you click out on it. So hopefully it is going down to 60%. Fingers crossed. But Pup Howard, look, again, with any of these freshmen, but especially with a guy like Pup, having the extra time, having the extra reps in practice, you hope will get these guys ready to go. And in the case of Pup, we know that the Gamecocks are banged up at linebacker, especially with the injury of Mo Kaba. So the fact that Howard has been here, Pup has been here since the Gator Bowl practices last year, was here in the spring. We know he obviously is big enough, but at the same time, too, he missed some time. That's why he was out in that blue non-contact jersey for a period of time this preseason camp. You're hoping, though, that he's able to have a good week of practice or have had a good week of practice, because obviously we're not at practice since the media does not have access to practices during the regular season. But you're hoping that he's had a good week and that when his number's called, that he's going to be ready to go. Because, look, as we mentioned before with Stone didn't come off the field. And Clayton said it yesterday that cannot happen moving forward. Got to give him a break. Got to give him a break. God Loves Comics going a little off topic, saying the pundits are saying that Dion, meaning Coach Prime, has changed the landscape so completely that soon rosters will almost fully turn over each season, and the old schoolers who resist the portal like Dabo are on the way out. I think here's the thing, and I know that there's probably a good portion of this fan base and a good portion of people that are watching right now that don't want to see that happen. And that's not talking directly about Coach Prime in Colorado, but knowing that college football and college athletics as a whole is slowly turning into a year-to-year thing. That you could have a lot of success in one season, but then the next year, guys enter the portal, they want more NIL money, they decide to go elsewhere. Like that's scary. I will say this, though. South Carolina has really, behind the scenes, from everything I've been told over the last 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, especially through Garnet Trust, they've really, really, really have been coming up with some good initiatives to help them on the NIL front. And while we can sit here and say we don't want players that, or players shouldn't be coming here just for money. Oh, we don't want those players if they're only here for the money. I get that. But at the same time, too, it's not just about recruiting players from the high school ranks. It also comes down to retention on your roster. Jeremy Smith, who will probably get upset with me that I'm giving him credit, Jeremy Smith from Garnet Trust, he played a big role with helping South Carolina retain the talent that they have. Now, obviously, there were some guys that left, but I can tell you, and it's not going to shock some people, there were some players where it was like, hey, you want to go? You want this type of money? Hey, you want that? Fine. See ya. Bye-bye. Okay? You're not going to be able to please everyone. And at the same time, too, it's not like you have monopoly money where you can just go to the closet, and find your board game and say, all right, Johnny, here you go. Here's your money to stay. Are you happy now? Like, that's not how it works. But Jeremy did an incredible job of helping retain some of South Carolina's top talent last year with some of those negotiations. Because it is part of it. It is part of it. So that's just the reality of it. So when Dabo, look, I think Dabo is going to have to realize that at some point you have to adjust, just like anything in life. You can push back. You can push back. I mean, I hate to pick on my buddies at the newspaper companies, but I mean, look at newspapers. I mean, that's a prime example. Newspapers, are a lot of newspaper companies, not everyone, because there's some that are successful that decided to make the switch over to digital. Newspapers push back. A lot of newspaper outlets push back. They never thought, oh, yeah, we're going to be fine. Oh, the internet's coming. Oh, digital. And look what's happening. They're slowly going extinct. It's happening to local news, unfortunately, too. There's so many things where in life, if you don't adapt, you're going to get left behind. Now, some of that you can't control, right? Can't control everything. But in this case, with the transfer portal and NIL, to a degree, you can control, at least, entertaining the portal. But look, Coach Prime and what Colorado's doing, as I said on Tuesday night on Talking Tuesdays, indirectly, South Carolina fans should be paying attention to what's going on over there, because it will have some type of ripple effect throughout college football. It will have some type of effect on South Carolina. Had effect on them this past offseason, losing an offensive lineman from a JUCO school that ended up ultimately going to Colorado. Colorado has success this year, even if they have 6 wins, 7 wins, whatever the case may be. If they're able to make a bowl game, my goodness, there's going to be a lot of players that are going to want to transfer there. And if the NIL money comes in, it could be a dangerous, dangerous situation. And when I say dangerous, what I mean is you're giving them even more resources. And I think Coach Prime can have success over there already, but it's going to have some type of ripple effect, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. It's just the reality of it. And I think seeing what took place last week against TCU kind of reassures that. Happy sends another comment in. I'm just going through here. Try to get some of the comments here. God Loves Comics. How confident against Georgia? I think you just worry about this week. You build confidence this week. Georgia's Georgia. We understand. I think if we sat here today and we wanted to get into the Georgia matchup that's going to take place a week from today, a week from Saturday. All my days are all mixed up now. That's what happens during football season. But if we want to sit here and talk about the Georgia game today, I don't know how good you feel about this team. Now, that's not to say after Furman this weekend, that come next week and you're going to feel like this team's great, even if they're having a lot of success against Furman. They're able to run the football. They're able to keep Rattler upright. No one's saying that. But I think you'd be feeling a little better in comparison to how you felt after Saturday night. You say you appreciate Garrett coming on. Going through. Thomas says, every time I count Beamer and the staff out, they get up and knock out Tennessee, Clemson, or A&M. And I think that's the thing. This team has proven over the last 2 years to find ways to get better as the season goes on. And what that tells me more than anything is, contrary to what some people will say on social media or the message boards, it's a testament to the coaching staff and what they're able to do to develop players as the season goes on. Now, there's a fair question that you can ask as to why isn't it always there at the beginning of the year? It's a fair question. What I would say to that, at least with this year, is, and it's not something that should surprise people, especially if you've been paying attention to Gamecock Central going back to last offseason, which is, this is a young team. Yes, you have Spencer Rattler. Yes, you have Juice Wells when healthy. But you have a lot of young players out there. This is a young team. Chase goes, a lot of rain in the forecast for Saturday night. Yeah, hopefully Mother Nature will cooperate. Another sellout for South Carolina. Another sellout. Another player, too. I want to throw this in there as well before we log off tonight. Elijah Griffin, 2025 class. He's a 5-star plus defensive lineman. He told Wes Mitchell, our colleague over at Gamecock Central, number 2 overall prospect on 3 industry rankings, he will be in South Carolina this weekend for the game. So be on the lookout for Elijah Griffin. You're also hoping that the weather is good. And the reason I say that is because you want to be able to show this young man what Williams-Brice is all about. Those lights, I know Justin King, he put a tweet out or he posted something on Instagram the other night. They were out there late, continuing to fool around the new light patterns they're going to do and light show that complements the music. It's going to be a good time, but just fingers crossed that the weather stays nice. It said missed on Diggs in the portal. Well, we've kind of hit on this before, David, but Logan Diggs, he's from Louisiana. He got recruited by Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. There's only so much you're going to be able to do. There's only so much that you're going to be able to do. Continuing to go down. If our O-line, this is from the KC. If our O-line can just improve to average, we'll be better. I'd love outstanding, but right now I'll take average. And that's the thing that from talking with people that are close to the program and even former players, I said, am I crazy to believe that if this South Carolina team, because again, I hate talking in hypotheticals, but am I crazy to believe that if this South Carolina team could have only allowed 5 sacks the other night, that they could have won, that they would have won, because they almost won the other night still. And they tell me no. We'd still have issues to talk about with the offensive line if they were allowing 4 or 5 sacks. But again, a lot of those sacks took place, and Colin Taylor, my coworker at GC, he pointed it out, that a lot of those sacks took place when South Carolina was inside the 30, on the plus 35-yard line, 30-35, going in. We saw one of the big plays where it impacted the Gamecocks, and that came on the intentional grounding, which goes down as a sack. Not being able to protect the quarterback was a major issue the other night. And if South Carolina can just improve that, just even by half, I think they're going to be able to work with something. I really do. And hopefully, I'm not saying it'll go, going against Furman this weekend, but if you're able to make that improvement by just half of last week, you're able to get confidence this week. Then you got to go against a very, very talented and good Georgia defense. You're going to know where you stand. So this weekend, it comes down to just gaining confidence. Gaining confidence. Trey Jones played fullback a few years ago. WJM41 points out. God loves comments. Going to wrap things up in a little bit, going a little bit longer. I'm going to have to give myself a break from talking. But we're going to wrap this show up a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit longer for you guys because there's a lot of comments and questions to get to. God Loves Comics says, running backs will come when they see the likes of Cam Pringle and Josiah Thompson coming in to join Big Tree and Marquee. And that's the other thing, too. I know that there's a lot of people that are excited to see these younger players. And I know some mentioned, why isn't Luedecke Babalade, a.k.a. Big Tree, out there? Again, going back to what Beamer mentioned, be patient with some of these freshmen. Marquee, unfortunately, he's a little banged up. He was on the 2 deep last week. He would have been on the travel list, but he got banged up prior to the North Carolina game. And as Beamer mentioned this past Tuesday, he is doubtful. But Beamer will talk again tonight. Carolina calls at 6 o'clock at Backstreet's Grill. If you want to listen to the program, if you can't get out there, you'll be on 107.5 The Game. If you are outside of the broadcasting zone for that, we'll have updates on Gamecock Central. USC Edit says, just win. Just win. Chase Hawkins says, Dion in Colorado will be knocked back down to earth soon. TCU lost a ton of its players. It was already bad on defense. I've been high on Colorado going into the season. When I say high, I mean them being able to make a bowl game, getting to 6 wins this year. Now, if you remember last Thursday, anyone watched the show, I did take Colorado to upset TCU. Straight up, money line. Play Nebraska this week. I'm sure I know how some Gamecock fans feel about Nebraska right now, at least about their offense. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Gamecock fans that will take Colorado this week. That conference as a whole, Pac-12, I think Colorado can have success in it. I really do. But at some point, yeah, they'll probably get brought down to earth. They got some tough teams that they have to play. And I say tough, I understand not the SEC schedule, but they have some tough matchups. It's not just some walk in the park. But got to give them credit. Came out, they were ready to go. Ready to go. Kevin Cox says, really enjoy your show. Thank you. No, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. WJM41 says Colorado faces the juggernaut of Marcus Satterfield and his offense this week. There you go. I wasn't going to say the name, but you brought it up. Phil says it takes a lot more to play running back than running the ball. I'd have to think that's a huge reason for the others didn't play. They likely will get a shot starting this week. Yeah, look, it goes back to the fact that when you have a Power 5 matchup week 1, you have to speed up the process of playing that week 1 opponent in comparison to when you're going up against a Group 5 team or a lower level FBS team or even an FCS opponent. You are putting more on the plate of these players. Now, that's not to say that some guys aren't, smart enough or anything like that. There's going to be certain guys that are able to pick things up a little bit quicker, right? And it's not even guys who enrolled back in the spring. There's going to be true freshmen that are able to do that, regardless of the position. But sometimes it just doesn't happen right away. That doesn't mean they're a failure. That doesn't mean that, oh man, they're not going to be able to amount to anything special as a player at South Carolina. No. It just means they weren't ready to go. Or let me rephrase that. It just means that the coaching staff didn't feel as confident and as comfortable to put them in that situation in week 1. I think we're going to see tweaks at numerous positions, certainly with the offensive line, as we've mentioned before. But with the running back situation too, I'm not saying you're mentioning this part, Phil, but I just want to throw this in there since we're talking about running back. I'm not ready to write off to Kerryon Joyner as a running back quite yet. I think because of the lack of blocking just as a whole up front, I don't think it's fair to just say, okay, man, DK, he didn't do this right, he didn't do that. Where? What freaking holes? What holes? So I think the verdict's still out on him. I'll feel more comfortable saying, okay, this about DK or that about DK after we get by that Mississippi State game. It might be after this game because, again, DK could have a great game. The offensive line could have a great game. There's going to be so many people that are going to look at it, despite the fact that Furman is a very good FCS team, the number 6 team in the country in FCS, and have won 8 of their last 9 games. But there's going to be a lot of people that will look at this game, regardless of the outcome, and say, well, South Carolina should have done that. And I'm not entirely disagreeing with that notion, but it also goes to show that it's going to be difficult to truly know where certain players stand, such as running backs or the offensive line or any position in this team as a whole. Lynn says, Len, good to have you on. Rosters can't flip every year because only one free transfer is allowed. Yes, Lynn, you are technically correct. However, and this is where I think people are talking about, the challenging part is you could have players that come in as freshmen, and obviously any grade really for that matter. They come in as a freshman and you're not able to retain them and they enter the transfer portal after that year. That's the challenging part that teams have to deal with every year. That's what we're talking about. That's the challenging part. And when you're talking about building a team, just like anything in life, the foundation is very, very important. But if you don't have that bottom level, right, the senior leadership, that's what I'm talking about, the core foundation. But if you're not able to have those freshmen there, freshmen are constantly transferring out. I'm not saying that is the case right now in South Carolina, but we're just talking in hypotheticals because it is going to be an issue for some schools. It's already been an issue for some schools. What's going to happen is players are going to enter the portal and you're going to lose essentially a good portion of that class that will now be sophomores, and then they'll be juniors, and then you'll have to continue to dabble in the transfer portal. That doesn't mean South Carolina, even if they're able to retain a lot of their talent and retain a lot of this team after this season, that doesn't mean that they won't look at the transfer portal. They certainly will, but it's just the reality of where we are now in college athletics, especially when it comes to football, that after each year, you truly don't know what's going to happen. Players are going to enter the portal. That's just the reality of it. Any school across the country, any school. That's just the reality of it. Moving along. Doesn't hurt that Boulder is beautiful. Yeah, it's a nice little place. I've never been to Colorado. Happy says, straight up, Dion is just a loudmouth, self-absorbed. This is your words. A-hole, not even winning can change that. In fact, it makes it worse, in my opinion. I love Dion. I do. I mean, I played defensive back in college. I like what he brought from a swagger standpoint because he always backed it up. It's a little bit different when he's a coach now. And I don't really, I know we're talking a lot about Dion here, and I don't really want to make this into a Colorado show. I'm just, kind of pointing out just how it's going to have an impact on college football as a whole, and will have an indirect effect at South Carolina. But I think it's a nice storyline. I think it's a neat story to pay attention to over in Colorado. And I think people can enjoy it right now simply for the fact that it's not a team that's in the SEC. If this was, I'm making this up, Auburn or Arkansas or wherever, it'd be a little bit different. I probably wouldn't be talking about it as much because I know Gamecock fans probably already, some don't want to hear about it, but they certainly wouldn't want to hear about it in that case. Chase says, Dion being an investor in Barstool, wouldn't that make him being the head coach conflict of interest when it comes to NIL? I don't know what his setup right now is with Barstool. I know he's working with Barstool for a while. I don't know if he is an investor, though. Those are your words, Chase. And I'm not saying you don't know what you're talking about because that's the first I've heard about him being an investor. Brandon, thoughts on the new clock rules? It felt like it really didn't make a difference because again, I was sitting up in the press box, but just based on the stop and go, it felt like the game itself was quicker, but it didn't feel that way just because it felt like there was more commercials, if that makes sense, right? Like there was less plays, and that's the God's honest truth. Like you can go back and look at the number of plays in comparison to, say, a year or two ago and go across the landscape of college football because there's always going to be outliers, and there'll be somewhere, it's the same as last year. There's actually a little bit more here. There's always going to be outliers. But it felt like the game itself was shorter, but because of all the stop and goes with the commercials, it felt like there was more commercials, and it felt like it took even longer. So, look, I'm all in favor of trying to speed things up. As much as I love college football, as much as I love football in general. But if you're going to make a rule change, what are we doing it for? What are we doing it for? To sneak in a couple more commercials? I mean, come on, man. I didn't like that. Let's see. Scrolling through. All right. Jay says Furman forced 5 turnovers over their first game. They did. They also had 2 pick sixes. Alonzo says Anderson and Braswell need some snaps this next game. We'll see what happens with it, Alonzo. We'll see. Again, it comes down to with Braswell, he's a freshman, okay? I've said this about so many freshmen, but especially a freshman that wasn't here during the spring. Slow down the expectations for some of these freshmen. Slow down. And that's not a direct shot at you, Alonzo. This is just in general the people that want to see some of these freshmen in there. You will see freshmen out there. This team is way too young, and they don't have the proven depth at some of those positions to avoid it. It's going to happen. But at the same time, too, it's not a video game. You're not just going to throw a freshman out there and they're going to be ready to go just because they were a 4-star or 5-star in high school. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. There'll be some guys that'll be ready to go, though. That's just the reality of it, though. A couple things we want to hit on before we wrap things up. Today's show, as it always is brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond of the Movement Mortgage. If you're trying to buy a home right now, you understand how difficult those rates are, right? Trying to find a cheap rate, trying to find the best rate, trying to find a home right now, trying to find a good home. It's not easy. Well, Clint and his team can help you make that process a little bit easier, the same way that he did with our very own Gamecock Central co-worker, Wes Mitchell, as well as former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth. Do what those two did and so many throughout this area by giving Clint a call at 803-771-6933. Today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Larry and the fine folks over at Liberty Tax. I know it's not tax season right now, but it's never too soon to start looking ahead and start preparing for tax season. If you want to overcome that taxiety by being able to get a little bit more organized so that when tax season rolls around, you're actually going to be ready to go. You're not going to have to worry about, oh, shoot, who do I have to call? Give the folks over at Liberty Tax a call at 803-462-5576 and let them know that Gamecock Central sent you. Well, everybody, I think we're going to wrap things up. Just looking right now at some of the final comments here. Happy says, have a good one, Mike. And chat crew, hopefully the Gamecocks can right the ship this weekend. Go Gamecocks. Chase says, I'd rather watch growing pains with the 4-star freshman than the train wreck that was Saturday night. It's hard to disagree with that, though, Chase. I mean, it's hard to disagree with you. You also said wider O-line splits would help against the edge rush, but you would have to bring in a fullback to shore up the middle. Michael goes, good show. Look, again, it hasn't been announced, but I kind of hinted at it on Monday. Don't be shocked to see the tackle positions look different this weekend. Don't be shocked to see Nick Arjulo out at left tackle. Don't be shocked to see Ja'Kai Moore at right tackle. Two guys that have experience. Ja'Kai, of course, playing right tackle and left tackle at South Carolina throughout his career. But Nick Arjulo also has experience of playing left tackle going back to his days at Yale. That's going to do it here for the show today. If you missed any of our program, you can head on back to the Gamecock Central YouTube page and watch it in its entirety. If you're not already a subscriber to the Gamecock Central YouTube page, why not just hit that little bell and you're good to go. Subscribe every time there's a new show or little video segment that we do, including Mixing a Water Monday, where every Monday we have a former Gamecock that joins us to help us break down the game that was. You will be notified. You'll be able to watch it from your phone. You can watch it on GamecockCentral.com. You can also watch it on YouTube. You have a smart TV. Put it on the big screen. Put us up on the big screen. Watch a show like this. GC Live programming. It runs every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Weekdays, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Wes and Chris, they're on at 2 o'clock for GC Live. Tuesday nights, it's me and intern Joe. GC Live Talking Tuesday nights at 7. And then on Thursday, the show that you're watching right now, GC Live Afternoon Drive. Sometimes have some guests in there as well. I think we're actually going to have Chris Doring of the SEC Network with us next week or in the next 2 weeks. So stay with us. We also throw in JD Piquel of On 3, who was on the show last week. Appreciate everyone that tuned in tonight. Kind of losing my breath. Losing my voice altogether. But again, Shane Beamer speaking tonight at Carolina Calls. That show will take place at 6 o'clock. And also, if you want to listen to this show, not just on YouTube, head on over to the Gamecock Central podcast platform. Wherever you listen to your podcast, you'll be able to listen to this show as well as all the other GC Live shows and Mixing a Water as well. Catch you guys after the game on Saturday for the GC Live post-game show. Again, Garrett Anderson, former Gamecock offensive lineman from 2006 to 2009, will be joining me. He was phenomenal on Monday with his assessment and breakdown of the offensive line and just the offense as a whole. Also talked about some defense, but Garrett will be able to share what he saw that was different. And we're praying to God that the offensive line is able to give Rattler some time so that we can not only talk about a Gamecock win, but we can talk about what was different with the O-line in the offense. Everyone have yourself a good rest of your Thursday and Friday. And if you're heading on over to Williams-Brice Stadium, maybe I'll see you and enjoy the game